We'll do a review of Likutei Siches in volume 18, Chelik Yud Ches, the second sicha for the Parsha of Pinchas. This sicha is a Rashi sicha in the end of the portion of Pinchas. And the Rebbe discusses the last verse, in which the verse says that Moshe Rabbeinu repeated that which Hashem has told him previously. He repeated it to the Bnei Yisrael. The pasuk in the Chamishi starts off with Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, Tzaves Bnei Yisrael. He tells him about all the various different korbanos, and he goes through the different korbanos of all the Yom Tovim, Shabbos first, and then Rosh Chodesh, and then all the Yom Tovim, and then it goes through the Pesach, so on and so forth, all the Yom Tovim. Eventually, Pasuk talks about Sukkot, and then in the last Pasuk, the Pasuk says, Vayomer Moshe, the new parak starts over here, Vayomer Moshe el Bnei Yisrael, so this that we learned in the beginning of this whole section, that Hashem says to Moshe to tell the Bnei Yisrael, Tzaves Bnei Yisrael, it's Karboni Lachmi. The pasuk tells us over here, the last pasuk of the Parshas Pinchas, that Moshe told to Bnei Yisrael like everything that Hashem has told him. But seems a little bit strange why the Torah needs to confirm that Moshe did what Hashem told him to Tzaves Bnei Yisrael, that he actually did so. Vayomer Moshe, that Moshe did so. We find many places in the Chumash where we find Hashem tells Moshe to do certain things, to say over certain things. We don't find in the pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu did so. That doesn't, because that's self-understood. Why does it say over here? Actually, this pasuk has a very strong. This whole section in the Parshas Pinchas is a very strong similarity to the Parshas Emer in the Chumash Vayikra. Over there too. The pasuk says, this is in, this is where I'm looking for the, this is all about Midbar. This is where, this is also in Emer. So over here, the pasuk says also by Daber Moshe, that Moshe speaks as Moed Hashem Bnei Yisrael. The previous parshas talk about all the Yom Tovim, the previous two parshas, and here too at the end of the parsha, the Torah says that Moshe Hashem, and again at the end of the parsha it says that Moshe Rabbeinu did like what Hashem told him. So these are the areas that the Rebbe is going to discuss over here. Why we need a pasuk over here to tell us. We have a pasuk over there. Also, these parshas of Parshas Emer and Parshas Pinchas are very similar, talking about all the Yom Tovim, whereas the Parshas Emer talks basically about the Yom Tovim itself. The Parshas Pinchas talks about the korbanos you brought in the Yom Tovim, and the Rebbe is going to equate all this. So let's look inside in the sicha. So, Ois Aleph. We'll start with Ois Aleph. Beim Siyum von der Sedra, by the end of the Sedra, this is the Parshas Pinchas, Nachdem wie die Parsha rechnet ois die korbanos, after the portion enumerates the sacrifices, first the Tamid, that was brought every day, the Musafim from Shabbos, the extra korban musaf that we brought on Shabbos, and the Rosh Chodesh, and every Moed, the Torah counts and tells us the exact korbanos that were brought in all the state. So then, to conclude the Parsha, Pasuk says, "Vayomer Moshe el Bnei Yisrael kichoil asher tziva Hashem es Moshe." That Moshe says to the Bnei Yisrael as Hashem has instructed to Moshe. So, for was darf the Pasuk sagen? Why does the Pasuk need to say, as Moshe had das als übergegeben to the Bnei Yisrael, that Moshe passed all this along to the Bnei Yisrael? then is nötig, is it then important to wissen to let us know as Moshe hat mekayim given dem Ebersten's Ansag that Moshe fulfilled Hashem's command to him. Tzaves b'nei Yisrael. Hashem tells to Moshe, instruct the b'nei Yisrael, B'marta aleim, and say to them, as korban ilachmi, tells them about the korbanos. So, do we need to tell us that Moshe fulfilled Hashem's instruction? And we find, we found in many places, as a state in order to Hashem Moshe. It only states, the verse writes only about Hashem's command to Moshe. Und nicht wie Moshe hat es noch übergeben die Yitzuin, and it doesn't state about how Moshe Rabbeinu passed along Hashem's command to him, to the Yid. It doesn't say that many places. So, over there we understand, why does the Torah not to tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu passed it along to the Yid, which Hashem told him, because that's obvious, to say that. When the Tam is Pasha, the reason why he doesn't say that, it's obvious. It's verstandig because it's self-understood. As vibald der Eibishter hat es gesagt, since Hashem has said it, to Moshe, Kidei, as all those übergeben zu Eden, in order for him to pass it along to the Jews, hat Moshe sicher as getan. So for sure Moshe did so. Und sie ist it is so obvious. As we find it as Rashi soll das bewohnen in sein Pirush, we don't find that Rashi should answer this in his commentary. Why he doesn't have to say that Moshe Rabbeinu? Where does it say that Moshe Rabbeinu did that which Hashem has instructed him? We don't have to say that because that's too obvious and it's so obvious. So it's not. It doesn't say. Hein. So the question is, for was dafes do der posuk? Yeah, that's so. So why does the verse here need to tell us about that Moshe Rabbeinu gave over the Hashem's instruction? And this is prompts Rashi's commentary. Is Rashi of them Fadish? So Rashi explains, Lahafsika inyan. This is to interrupt the subject, interrupt it from the next parsha. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. This is Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. The Rebbe points out in the Hora that this is the part that Rashi quotes from the Sifri. The Rashi explains what it means, Lahafsika inyan Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. What does it mean to interrupt the subject matter? Rabbi Shmuel says. So Rashi explains. Lefi Z'at kan dvorav shel mokim. Up to this point, was Hashem speaking as the parsha started off by Daber Hashem al Moshe, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael, Skorboni lachri, all the instructions from the Eberster. This is Dvorim Shel Mokim. Now the next parsha, Parshas Matos, it starts off with the words of Parshas Nedorim, which is the parsha Matos, Mascheles v'dibur Shel Moshe. That starts with Moshe's words. The pasuk starts off. This is the pasuk that follows the end of Parshas Pinchas, and where it says that Moshe gave over. Then it says Vaydaber Moshe al Rosh Hamatis. So over here, we finished the previous parsha. We were talking about Hashem's commands to Moshe, all the different karbonos. Here it's talking about Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the Matis Hashem. So it changes from Hashem's talking that the pasuk records in the end of Parshas Pinchas, and then this parsha begins with Moshe Rabbeinu talking. That's why the pasuk needs to first interrupt and say, that's why at the end the pasuk has to say that Moshe said it to the Yidden. If it doesn't say so befedish, then it is understood. You can understand that he actually did not tell them this parsha. But rather he starts off with the portion of Nedarim. because he says over there we start right away. If he didn't say that he said that, we don't know. It would say if it didn't finish with the words in the pasuk at the end of Parshas Pinchas saying that Moshe Rabbeinu gave it over, then you would see that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't give it over because Moshe starts right away through the Parshas of Dorim. So that's why it says Rashi explains. However, the Rebbe still says, but okay, that's seems to explain that we need a pasuk for that, but it's still not really a good explanation, because even if there wasn't an end pasuk, how could one expect that Moshe Rabbeinu did not listen to Hashem? Hashem tells him to go and tell the Bnei Yisrael, but that Rabbi versteht. We still need to understand. As takas oibsvot nit gestanden der pasuk, let it be true that if the pasuk would not say Vayemer Moshe Bnei Yisrael goymer, the Moshe Rabbeinu said Yisrael volt given mashmosek, so the pasuk would appear. We'll grant you that it would seem so. Since only after this it begins the part of Dvaros Moshe, so we don't have anywhere Moshe Rabbeinu saying this. It almost says, but as the Friedige Parshat Moshe Nitibigaktin, so it almost seems like he didn't say over the previous. He didn't say it over because over there we finished the words of Hashem, and then we started off with Moshe Rabbeinu saying something else. The Parshat to Dorim. But the Rebbe says, "We can over sein afila kozal kadaita." But how could it even be a thought that you're writing the pasuk so that you shouldn't think so? As Moshe had nit bekaim given the Meibishter's onzog, that Moshe did not fulfill Hashem's instruction. Tzavis b'nei Yisrael v'martalei. Pasuk begins that Hashem says to Moshe, "Instruct the b'nei Yisrael and say to them, as korban ilachmi the parsha the korban is." So even if the pasuk doesn't say this, would we really then think that Moshe Rabbeinu did not transmit them, even if it didn't say that Moshe Rabbeinu did it, that he gave over to the Bnei Yisrael? Still is not. So we need to understand this. The Rebbe will say now in Ois Beis that actually the Ramban has a different interpretation in what the Divrei Rabbi Yishmael is Hifsika Inyan. Not like Rashi explains. According to the Ramban's explanation in Rashi, that seems okay. We have an explanation why we need to, what Rabbi Shmuel means to interrupt, but that doesn't fit in Rashi because Rashi says different than the Ramban. Let's look inside. His base. The Ramban is mefarish. The Ramban explains the pshat in Rabbi Shmuel's Verta Lahapsika Inyan. He explains the meaning what Rabbi Shmuel said to interrupt the subject matter as follows: If the pasuk would not say that Moshe said all these words that Hashem told him to the Bnei Yisrael, so then what man nit gewusst zu welche parshas batzitz of the pasuk, then we wouldn't know to which of the portions the verse that says Vaydaber Moshe that the El Rosh Hamatis, is this the previous pasuk Tzila Achrov? Is it going what follows Rosh Hamatis? So the dinim from Parshas Matis to the laws of the portion of Matis, or the Lefonov, or before to the dinim from Unzer Parsha, to the laws of our Parsha. We don't know where to fit in that pasuk. We don't know where to fit in. Here the pasuk starts. This is in. This is the beginning of Parshas Matis. Moshe Rosh Hamatis Yisrael Lemer Zadavar Shetziv Hashem. Is Zadavar Shetziv Hashem referring to Vaydaber Shem Moshe Tzavis Bnei Yisrael in Parshas Matis, or it follows to what follows afterwards, the din Ishki Yeder Neder. So therefore, we need a pasuk to the din of Parsha Madlufonov to the din from Unzer Parsha. So the Rebbe stayed by Sim from Unzer Parsha. That's why at the end of our Parsha it says, Vayomer Moshe Bnei Yisrael Goymer, that Moshe says to the Bnei Yisrael, everything that Hashem told him. So we know this is what he told Hashem. And then, in order to interrupt the subject matter, when it says later on, Moshe speaks to the Rosh Hamatas, over there begins a new subject matter, the Parshas Nedorim, the portion of Nedorim. This idea, Lahafsika Inyan, is actually the common meaning of Lahafsika Inyan that we find that we interrupt in order to let you know where to put a certain verse, to the back, to the front. That would be commonly, but the Rebbe's argument is going to be that's not really what Rashi says, as we'll see in a second. This is actually the meaning, the interpretation when it says to interrupt the matter in many places in the Sifra and the Sifri. The Ramban Zogt, as the Ramban says, is Moisiv Nochmer. And the Rambam adds even more than that even Rashi Alein Zogt if Posik. Rashi says on the verse later on, Baita in Parshas Matais. So over there it says like this: Ba'ato Hirgu Kol Zochar, kill all the males over there. After the Parshas of Midian over there, they caused the Yidden to sin. So Hashem says, kill all males. Now we don't know. Does it go v'chol isha, hirgu kol zachar, and then v'chol isha, or v'ati hirgu kol zachar, and v'chol isha yedas ish? It should go together with those that you don't kill. So that's why the pasuk has to write hirgu kol zachar v'chol isha haroigu. As der zweiter haroigu. So Rashi explains why does it have to say isha haroigu? Because if the pasuk state lahavsika inyan, Rashi says to interrupt the matter. The Taich Rashi says, as noch v'chol isha. If after v'chol isha the pasuk would not repeat haroigu, what did gestana noch amol haroigu would not have stated again haroigu. But when it gives us, then we would know tzi v'chol isha v'goymer. Does v'chol isha get to Friede consume from haroigu? That it goes on the previous category haroigu. Ba'ata hirgu v'chol isha haroigu. If it didn't say haroigu, then it would be ba'ata hirgu v'chol isha. Or there's some weiter dicken, or what it says further v'chol atavach goymer achaylechem. Then you may have read it v'chol isha. If it didn't say haroigu v'chol isha v'chol atavach achaylechem. So that's why this word haroigu interrupts to tell you that this isha is haroigu. And the cholataf achaylechem, that goes later on. So you see, that's the meaning of lahavsika. So that would explain why we need this pasuk over here, just so we know the meaning of the parsha of Rosh Hamativ V'daber Moshe. What is it going on? Going on the past or on later on? But Rashi, in Pirush Rashi, but in this Rashi, that Rashi says later, that's something else. But in our Rashi, we cannot mean this is what lives Geinya of Rabbi Shmuel. Rashi doesn't say so. But Rashi is Mishana from Loshen HaSifri. Rashi actually changes the language of the Sifri. The Sifri says, Eini Yodea B'mei Inyan B'daber. He says, I don't know by which subject is he speaking of, which means the laws of Korbanos or the laws of Nedorim. That's the meaning of the Sifri. Und Shrai B'Feber Rashi writes very clearly, as we need the pasuk Vayemer Moshe Goymer, what would we learn if another pasuk would matos gehat? Then the mistake would be not as der spetedike pasuk, not like we're learning like the Ramban and everywhere else by Daber Moshe Rosh Hamashes Hamatos Goymer v'tzitzich tzufrier. We would think if not that, maybe it goes to the past. You look at Pirush Ramban as the Ramban explains. Nor, I says clearly as loy omar lohem zu. Not this pasuk, you think he might have not told them this. He only started with Pashat Dorim, and this he didn't tell them. So the question the Rebbe asked, why would we think that Moshe Rabbeinu would not tell them what Hashem has said? That doesn't seem to really fit. In Ois Gimel, the Rebbe is bringing in the other place in the Torah, in the Parshas Emer, in which there is also a similar pasuk at the end of the entire Parshas of the Yom Tovim. And actually over there, we can't give Rashi's answer because, like over here we're saying because it follows by Moshe Rabbeinu, and we wanted to make sure how to translate the pasuk of Vaydaber Moshe Rosh Amatis on the past or the future. But over there we can't say that because over there what follows is also the Amira of Hashem. So let's look inside. Gimel. Euch darf man verstehen. Also, we need to understand. Wie der Ramban fragt, as the Ramban asks. Euch in Parshas Emer, also in the portion of Emer, beim Soif from Parshas Hamoyedis. At the end of the section, when the Torah discusses all the Yom Tovim, Zog der Posik, the Posik states, by Daber Moshe Moed Hashem Bnei Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu speaks Hashem's festivals to the Bnei Yisrael. That's the summation at the end that Moshe gave over the Moed Hashem to the Bnei Yisrael. We actually find in the expounding interpretation of our sages of blessed memory, Kama Biurim, several explanations for Vos Darfstein der Posik, why we need this pasuk to be stated. Rashi Rashi, however, does not raise a stop on that and doesn't ignores it and just goes weiter. Isn't it move on? So it's not understood. If in the simple meaning of the verse, Fader Tzibir requires explanation. Farvos der pasuk der zel. Why the pasuk relates as Moshe Tiberi gem dem Tzivga Hashem. That Moshe transmitted the instruction of Hashem to the Yidden, about the festivals to the Yidden. If we're going to say that that is something that we need to explain, why would this have to say? Then Rashi should have explained the dort wo mir gefindt das in Posik zum ersten Mal. He should tell us that in the place where we find it the very first time, which would be in Parshas Emer, for the year in Parshas Emer, before in the portion of Emer. Und nicht warten bis unser Posik, and not to wait until our Posik. So, first of all, why doesn't Rashi raise it over there? And second of all, the answer would not fit over there. Nochmer, di hasbor of Rashi zogdo. The explanation that Rashi says that the Posik is coming to teach us, to tell us that up to here is the word of Hashem, and that's why, and then Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that gave it over, so that Matis goes on the pre. Over there, you can't say it in the Parshas Emer, but the Parshas Lacher is there, because over there it finishes after the Parshas Karbonis. It finishes with the word of Shalmokim. The next pasuk, Parshas, starts with the word of Shalmokim, but that Hashem and Moshe Leimer. So we don't need, Hashem says to Moshe Leimer, so we don't need over there, we wouldn't need that pasuk to interrupt because we know ourselves. So over here, you argue that you need that, but over there, after the psukim in Emer, just take a look for a second. So here, Chamisha also Sukkos. So over here, you can't say that. The reason why the pasuk writes by Daber Moshe Moed Hashem Bnei Yisrael, so you know that up to here finishes the words of Hashem. What follows will be the words of Moshe. In this case, you can't say that because what follows the next pasuk is by Daber Moshe Leimer Tzadnik Shem Zayis. So Rashi's explanation wouldn't fit there. So Rashi doesn't raise it over there. And Rashi's explanation would actually not fit over there. So why does Rashi not raise it over there and raises it over here? In Ois Daled, the Rebbe explains why in Parshas Emer, over there it's logical for the Torah to have to write this extra pasuk, because over there that portion contains in the Emer, when it talks about the Tovim, there were a lot of halachas that were not applicable at that time. They had to wait till they went back into Eretz Yisrael, till they got into Eretz Yisrael. So, and then there was a lot of pressing issues that were at that time. So one could mistakenly think that when Hashem said to Moshe to give it over to the Bnei Yisrael, but those non-pressing issues that weren't applicable immediately, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu waited with them and didn't give him over. So the pasuk ends up in Parshas Emer by saying, no, Moshe Rabbeinu gave everything over right then and there. But in our Parsha, there's no reason to think that Moshe Rabbeinu did not give it over immediately. There's no delay, should be no delay over there. And that's why Rashi has a problem in Parshas Pinchas. Why does the Torah have to say that Moshe Rabbeinu gave it over? It's obvious. Let's look inside. Dalit. Der Tam farvos odi kasher. The reason why this question, why does it need to state in the pasuk that Moshe gave over this command of Tzav Bnei Yisrael? Vert davke do unit in Parshas Emer. That is specifically over here and not in the portion of Emer. Kemazon gor portion. So we can say this very simple. Parshas Hamoedes from Parshas Emer, the portion that talks about the Yom Tovim as it is recorded in the portion of Emer, is gesagt geworden bismichas zu Hakomas Hamishkan. That was said not too distant from Hakomas Hamishkan. Hakomas Hamishkan was on the Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So, and therefore, that was noch Fahren Minyan Bnei Yisrael. That took place before the counting. The counting of the Bnei Yisrael, this was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Bashana Hashem Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Hukam HaMishkan. On the second month, which is Iyar, the Echad, then is the number noch Fahren Minyan Bnei Yisrael. That's before the counting of the Bnei Yisrael, which started the Echad LaChodesh Hasheni. That was on the first day of the second month. That means Aleph Iyar. So next to somewhere close to Aleph Nisan, so there was a month between before the counting. They were told already about the counting of the Bnei Yisrael. In the Chumash Bamidbar, it says about the counting that took place in Echad LaChodesh Hasheni. Und zwischen den Mitzvahs und Dinim dorten, and amongst the mitzvahs and the laws that are discussed in the Parshas Pinchas, which in the Parshas Emer, which Hashem told him, Tzavas Bnei Yisrael, some of them, there's some of them that their observance only applies when in the Eretz Yisrael. The Dugma, as for example, the din of the Omer, the din of Chodosh, the Omer to bring the Korban Omer, and then the din of not Chodosh, Shtei Halachem. Those were all when when you tzirchitim, the tzirsoirim, when you cut the green, that's all in Eretz Yisrael. It didn't apply there. And here you still have to do the counting of the Bnei Yisrael. But you can't mean it, so you can think, let it be true, actually, that Moshe did pass along all the Hashem's commandment to the Yid, and furthermore, not only did he give it over, but usually he would actually do it immediately. After he heard there's a command from Hashem, he went and he told it to the Bnei Yisrael. Verstandig from Pirush Rashi by Matan Torah, as understood in Rashi by Matan Torah in Yisrael. Over there, Rashi brings down, Moshe did not turn to his own personal occupations, but immediately from the mountain, he went to the people. So when he heard from Hashem, he went right away and told it over. That would be the usual conduct of expectation of Moshe Rabbeinu. That would be obvious. But in them fall, but in this case, one would say that maybe not all the details of all the laws he immediately gave over. The reason is since they are not applicable to action immediately in Yanam's man at that time. And then Be'ez, as Moshe is given for Numan, Moshe was preoccupied, so he had to make some choices which laws to relate, to give over. At that time, Moshe is given for Numan mit Entfer Nadovar HaKosher, as the Pasuk says, the difficult matter was Yaviu and Moshe bring to Moshe. He had to teach them the path they need to go and what they need to do practically at that moment in technical level in the daily lives. So there were not applicable laws that he didn't have. Then he had things that he had to give over. Ubefrat loider day from Masnisa, but Pirush Rashi Emir. Rashi brings down over there from the Masnisa, the two Pirushim, why did at the end of Emir over there, when he went to be Makalal, what was the problem over there? And Rashi says that because he wanted to put his tent, he was from a non-Jewish father, and he wanted to come to the Machne Don because his mother was Shlomi Bas Divri, the Machne Don, and therefore it's Mashmusas Parsha Moshe Dort, that section of Moed, that's right after the Parsha of the Moed is Gizog geworden noch Parshas de Golim. That was said following the Parshas de Golim. So therefore there was the dispute took place over there. And that's when the Parsha of the complaint over there that he wanted to cap after the Golim. So there wasn't under the Parsha, so there was a lot of, so that was already further on, and there was many other Parshas that in Damul Given Agil Maisa. There were many things that were little applicable. The Dugma, Minyan B'nai Yisrael, that to count the B'nai Yisrael, that was in Chodesh Iyar Aleph. And there was the Golim, the camps, the way to set them up. And the Masah is the journeys, the Pesach Sheni, which was over there in Chulu. So the Far is the Pasuk Dort Moshe. So that's why one would think maybe Moshe Rabbeinu did not give over those details of the laws which were applicable later in Eretz Yisrael, while he had to deal with the daily action life that over there that was applicable right then. The Far is the Pasuk Dort Moshe himself. That's why the verse ends there in the end by Daber Moshe Smeir de Hashem of Bnei Yisrael. Moshe speaks the festivals of Hashem to the Bnei Yisrael, which means as a Rodbal Iberigigem alle Protodinim for the Parsha to the that immediately he gave over all the details of the laws of the Parsha to the Und das Gufa lernt uns, and this itself teaches us as the Tzivut to Moshe, Daber Bnei Yisrael Lamarta Aleim Moed Hashem. So because he did give it over, the question is why Taka did he give it over right away when he had more? But the fact that the pasuk tells you that he gave it right away, that means that when it says Daber Bnei Yisrael Lamarta Aleim Moed Hashem v'goimer, what it means is that not that he's just telling them at some point. Gemeint as so that he should immediately give over all the laws. In unser Parsha, as opposed to in our portion, which is nitok in time of Zulegen, there is no reason to delay. Is the Chmuvah of canal. So then it's self-understood. Why would we need a pasuk to tell you that? He told them, and that was the instruction to do right away. There was no reason by us to delay it and not tell them right away. After the command of Hashem, that instructed Bnei Yisrael, Parshas Pinchas over here, so Moshe immediately gave over all the laws. Since we're talking about it towards the end of the 40 years, if not now, and now the Parshas Pinchas, this is already the end of it. After, so he did it right away. So that's why why does the pasuk have to say? It's obvious that he gave over either ways. Therefore, the difficulty is, was the Tzeltun's their pasuk? Why? What is the pasuk telling us? That Moshe said to the Bnei Yisrael everything that Hashem told him. What is this coming to tell us? It's obvious. If that meant with Rashi, that's what Rashi answers. This is to interrupt this matter. And otherwise, it would be understood that he actually did not tell them this at all. But he started with the portion of the Vorim, as the Rebbe will say later on, explain in Siv Zayin, the answer to the question why, what does it mean that he did not tell them this parsha at all? How could that be, as the Rebbe asked earlier? In Ois Hey, the Rebbe continues to explain, first of all, why Rashi quotes. The Rebbe didn't ask it in the beginning, but why Rashi brings down Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rashi could have said, without bringing the name, that always means something. But also, the Rebbe explains now that this whole answer that we said that it's possible that Moshe Rabbeinu did not give over the mitzvahs of Hashem immediately because he was busy, preoccupied with other things, and that's why the pasuk has to emphasize Vaydaber Moshe that he did speak everything. In Parshas Emer, that's what we don't have in the whole question. The Rebbe said that only goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. As the Rebbe explains, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva argue b'chlal. Rabbi Yishmael says that anything that we find in the Torah, that is the time that the Eibishter has told it to him. And even though Moshe Rabbeinu was on the mountain for 40 days, the Eibishter gave him the general Torah, but the specifics, whenever the Parsha records, that's when there is that's when it took place. That's when Hashem told him at that time. For the first time, that's when Hashem told him. And that's the Torah records that. And therefore, we say that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu didn't give everything over at that time. But according to Rabbi Akiva over there, he says, no, everything, whatever we find in the Torah, that wasn't by Dabra Hashem and Moshe. No, but that wasn't the first time. Everything was already said, specific details before. As a matter of fact, everything in the Torah came around 3 times. Once before, once during the Idayel Moed, and then another time in Arvis Moed, a third time. So it turns out that according to Rabbi Akiva, the whole Torah was written, it was said again. And therefore, it's only logical. There's no reason for Moshe Rabbeinu not to say it to the Bnei Yisrael, because everything was said to the Bnei Yisrael 3 times. It was said, not 3 to Bnei Yisrael, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, but then it was told to the Yidden 3 times. And therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, we have to say that why does the pasuk write over there for a different reason? We'll see in a minute. The Rebbe will also explain why it goes only according to Rabbi Akiva, but I can say that not according to Rabbi Yishmael. Let's look inside. Hey, move on. Based on this, we also understand Rashi is maitik the nomen from Bal HaMaimer, why Rashi quotes the name of the author of the statement, Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Because the Bira now, the above mentioned explanation why Rashi doesn't need to explain. And it needs, the Rashi doesn't explain because in Parshas Emer it needs to state by Dabra Moshe Bnei Yisrael in order to teach us, if it doesn't say, then you might have thought that maybe he put it off for later on because it wasn't applicable. And then once you explain that over there we have an explanation, then we need to find a answer in our Sedra, because we don't have that explanation by us. There's no reason to delay, so why does the pasuk have to tell us that he said it? Rashi has to come up with another answer. That only applies to Rabbi Yishmael. Is masim norlei das Rabbi Yishmael? That only fits with the view of Rabbi Yishmael. As klolus namru b'Sinai. that the general Torah was said in Sinai, uprotus boil moed, and the details, the specific of the Vaydaber Hashem and how to do all the mitzvahs, that was said by El Moed to Moshe Rabbeinu, Vaydaber Hashem El Moshe. The Mela is Oichda Nor Zog Genau, so therefore, one can also say, therefore, possibly say, as Moshe had abgewart mit übergeben die Protadinim von the Moedim, that Moshe Rabbeinu waited with giving over the details of the laws of these festivals because they weren't applicable now, so they were new laws. And since there were new laws, Moshe Rabbeinu waited for them to do the more important ones, and those he will say later on. The pasuk is coming to reject and say, no, that's a good explanation. Oh, but according to his, the Tana that disagrees with him, Rabbi Akiva, which Rabbi Akiva was held as Klolus Uprotus Nemru Sinai. He holds that everything was said in Sinai, the general rules and also the specifics. All the Vaydaber Hashems were already said. Finished the Boil Moed, and then the Hashem repeated again to Moshe. When we see Vaydaber Hashem on Moshe, there was a repetition. They were said then, but Hashem said it a second time. Finished Tal Shlu B'Arvis Moed, and then they were repeated a third time at the Arvis Moed before in the plains of Moed, before going after the 40 years in the Mishnah Torah when he was before they were going into Eretz Yisrael. Kumtois. So it turns out that all the details of the mitzvahs were said, even when they weren't applicable, they've been said. Because all the mitzvahs were constantly said 3 times. And I mean, they were said that a lot, and then again, and then everything was said over there. So why should we say that here he waited with transmitting these laws until later? There's no reason for that. So, according to Rabbi Akiva, we don't really have an answer. Why does the pasuk have to say that Moshe Rabbeinu gave over the laws in Parshas Emer? So we have to come up with another answer. So we have to say, well, just sometimes the pasuk gives us the way Moshe Rabbeinu said it, Hashem said it to Moshe. Sometimes it says when Moshe said it, and for that we know that Hashem said it to Moshe. Sometimes it says both. So therefore you have to say, as Lloyd Rabbi Akiva, he says, according to Rabbi Akiva, to begin with, this is not a question, not a problem. But because he's of the view, as is the derech hakosuf, that this is the actual way of the pasuk. As Amol stated, Dibur Abai El Moshe. Sometimes the pasuk will say what Hashem spoke to Moshe. Amol, sometimes it will say the Dibur Moshe to Bnei Yisrael, what Moshe says to the Bnei Yisrael. Unamol Beida, sometimes it says both. So therefore, we also don't have a problem on the verse in our parsha because, okay, that's just according to Rabbi Akiva, the verse does this sometimes, so it's not a problem. Well, so why don't we say this also according to Rabbi Yishmael? Sometimes the Torah writes this, and then we don't have a problem. But the Rebbe says, but because this is actually the idea why Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree, whether when the Torah writes it, is this the first time, or this is already a repetition, as Rabbi Akiva says. And the reason is because Rabbi Yishmael learns that whenever the Torah writes it, that's when it happens. So, therefore, that's for that same reason we should say that in the pasuk says by Dabar Hashem El Moshe, that's a present, that is not just this the derech of the Torah. Let's look inside. We can't need frag. You can't ask this. Parvos can need zogadam tiris. So why can't we not say the same answer as the pasuk state that this pasuk over here in Parshas Pinchas, in which it states again that Moshe Rabbeinu repeated, transmitted what he was told to the Israel, not in order to take away from to reject a mistake that might come in the idea of the parsha, nor belois mitzader chakosuf, but rather this is just that this is the way of the pasuk. Why don't we say it also according to Rabbi Yishmael, just like we just said it according to Rabbi Akiva? Well, yesh loymar, because we can say as in them Gufa is totally the plukta now from the Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. We can say this is actually what Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael are arguing, whether we can say such a thing, that the pasuk is just there because this is a Teichana Pasha. This explains what they're idea of their machlokes is about whether the Torah was all given b'chlol before and the protis, or this is a new thing. But yesh leimar in them gufi is totally the plukta now. You can say in this itself hinges the disagreement of above for Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, from Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Loit Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, as klolus uprotu member of Sinai, that the general and also the details were all said in Sinai, and then the Nishnu Boyel Moed, and then they were repeated again in Moed, the Nishtashul Barvis Moed, and then they were again a third time in the plains of Moed. They were said over. Darfman Zogam. So then we have to say, as agamas alla mitzvahs b'chlos b'protus, even though all the mitzvahs in a general way and in specific, were said 3 times. The Sinai, in Sinai, Mount Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu was the Boyel Moed from the 10th meeting, Ubarvis Moed in the plain of Moed, is Ober, the Torah, Nit Mefarish, Torah, however, doesn't detail, doesn't explain. In Dry Erter, in 3 places, the Allah mitzvahs protein, all the mitzvahs protein. Blois achelik von zei in 2 Erter, a portion of all of the Torah in 2 places. Some of them in Abbas Meir, some here, but not all of the Torah. So not everything is clear. So therefore, same thing is in our matter. Torah is not always everything specific. So when it comes to, says Rabbi Akiva, when it comes to a pasuk which says, these were the words in Parshas Emor at the end, that this was the word that Moshe Rabbeinu transmitted. Amol is the Torah mefaret eichdem dibur from Moshe B'nei Yisrael, and Amol nit. Sometimes the Torah specifies, sometimes it doesn't. Just like the pratim, the clothes, we don't always have. The tam from Rabbi Yishmael, on the other hand, that he says, ask klolus namre b'sinai. That the general Taki said b'sinai, but pratim b'mayed. Why does he say that? Kemen zogen, so we can say, halt, he's of the view, as b'chlal darfen on him, that in general we should accept, as yet the pratim the inyan, that every detail and matter, via vet geschnitten the Torah, the way it's written, the Torah is vidos is given bepoilis as it was in actuality. Unless there is some sort of proof, evidence, we're forced to say differently. The Rebbe Halter, therefore, he's of the opinion, as the prota mitzvahs that the details of the mitzvahs were commanded, were said, wherever the Torah says that, he said that's the detail. Or nit, and not dry mold 3 times. In Sinai, in Sinai, no, that's not what it says. But there's a binyanenu, similar in our case. Bald as the Torah is mefarish umefared davkedo by daber Moshe Gomer Israel. Why is the Torah saying it over here? Can't just say, just like that, like we said according to the Akiva. Over here, das is the far. Was is do achidish? This is because there is a novelty to that parsha specifically, and therefore Rashi has to explain it. So what's the shaykhs to our parsha? So Rashi explains lavsika inyan, but according to Rabbi Akiva, there's no question, because his approach is that sometimes it's okay for it to be sometimes this way, sometimes that way, so we don't have a problem. And that's what Rashi has to quote here, that this is Rabbi Yishmael, because this goes only according to Rabbi Yishmael. In Ois Vov and Zayin, the Rebbe comes up with a gewaldige chiddush and explanation in the Rashi. But first, in Ois Vov, the Rebbe gives us 2 total different possibilities how we can learn these 2 psukim. We know these 2 parshas. We have the parshas in Emor, which basically talks about the Yom Tov itself. And then we have the parsha in Bamidbar in Pinchas, which talks about the korbanos that you brought on the Yom Tov itself. And the Rebbe says that there's 2 possibilities. Either we're going to say that these were totally 2 separate parshas said in different times, because the parshas Pinchas, we're talking about after the 40 years in the desert. That's when the parshas Pinchas, when we talk about the korbanos, and the actual Yom Tov was told to them earlier, as the Rebbe pointed out earlier, that Parshas Emor was said close to the time of Hakamas HaMishkan. So these were 2 separate times. But the Rebbe says there's another possibility. The possibility that both these parshas were said in the beginning is just that they're placed over here. And because of this last pasuk, we know Rashi's conclusion that the Rebbe will learn out. We know that this parsha was actually said over here after 40 years and not before. Here, very, very interesting explanation of it. Vov, let's look inside. Der Tambos Klolus in Yonei Hamoides is settled in zwei parshas. What's the reason that generally we talk about Yom Tov and we have two separate portions? One talks about the Yom Tov, the other one talks about the Karbonis. So Aleph, and Rebbe says, what are the two parshas? First, we have in Parshas Emer, the portion of Emer, with the Iker Adgosha, the main emphasis is Yisur Melocha. Talks about the prohibition of doing work. Unav the mitzvahs from Yad Yontav, and about the mitzvahs that every Yontav you that you do, the lulav, the esrik, the sukkah, the matzahs. As wird dort aber euch gerät bechlolus wegen der Karbonis von Yad Yontav, and the Torah mentions there in a general way the Karbonis that you bring every Yontav. Ishay, it's about the fire that it's bring the Karban. That's the parsha of Emer, talks about Yontav mainly. Beis in unser parsha, Parshas Pinchas, with that Goshi Ikris is of the Prote Karbonis. Over here, the main emphasis is on the details of the Karbonis. Was me bringt, tells you, jeden Tag, every day, what you bring the Korban Tomed and the Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh und Yom Tov, and what you bring on Yom Tov. Aber es wird da euch der Mond, and over here, there's also a mention, like Yisro Malach von Yom Tov, or Yisro Malach Yom Tov. So, why separate them? How do we translate? You can explain this in two ways. Number one, Aleph, they were told to Moshe, these as Basundere zwei Parshas, they were two separate sections. In Basundere Zeiten, separate times. Parshas Emer was said, Bismiches to Akamas HaMishkan, that was said close when the Mishkan was raised, right in the beginning, in the Echad Benisim, the beginning of the second year in the desert. On Parsha saying zum Sefer that by Mishana, our Parsha came at the end of 40 years in the desert. So the Rebbe says now that doesn't mean that there was no karbonis over there. The specific, the karbonis were there, even though, according to Rashi, the Ramban says no, but the Rebbe learned to Rashi. Those was man had the parshas hakarbonis from Parshas Seinu nit gizog bald noch hakomis hamishkan. Why was this portion of the karbonis not said after hakomis hamishkan? The Rebbe says, and simply we can say, that they were also brought in the midbar. The Rebbe has evidence from different places. With the exception, those were the Torah says when you come to the land, but otherwise they brought them. But these karbonos are not enumerated over there. But Moshe Rabbeinu could have told them. So what they need to do, but without being the parsha specifically. So what is then the main purpose? Well, how come this wasn't said to them then? Because the Eifte from the parsha is Savas b'nei Yisrael v'amarta leim. That this is something that you say to all the b'nei Yisrael and say to them. The Zirus onzog to alle Eden. This is the encouragement to all Yidden Amart Tzavet B'nei Yisrael. That they need to bring in the time. So this was the purpose and the goal of the Parsha of Pinchas. It wasn't just to reveal exactly what the karbonos have to be done, but the Tzavet B'nei Yisrael. But the Protar karbonos gufa, but the details of the karbonos, they have been told to Moshe before. He has given it over to the individuals who were occupied with hakrovas hakarbonis, with those who need the karbonis, those who sacrifice the karbonis out of one of our kohanim, Aaron and his son the kohanim, which means that basically while the parsha wasn't told to them, Moshe Rabbeinu told them the details that are in the parsha, but the parsha over here, the Eibusher is giving them a zirus that all Yidden should know that the karbonis tmidim should all be responsible for it. That would be one. According to these are two separate times. But Beis, the other interpretation, Beis the Parshi is eine Gesogewon zu Moshe zusammen. Really, they're both set together. They're placed in a different place over there. In Parshas Emer, when the Eibishter tells them that the same thing is by the Karbonis. And actually, the Karbonis come first. Parshas are Karbonis, the Parshas Seinu. On the contrary, the Karbonis of our Parshas is Gizogavon, Koidem the Parshas Amoidis. It was said before the portion of Amoidis from Emer. And you see, there's a hint when you talk about in the Parshas Amoidis and Parshas Emer, was the first state in Parshas Amoidis over there in Parshas Emer. It says Vikraftem Isha. It doesn't give you a detail. Stam. Nit oistaichli when the Yom Tov comes to bring a fire offering, a burnt offering. Was for a korban da bringen. It doesn't say why, because essentially this comes after the Parshas Pinchas. We can say that. While the Prota Karbonis hat men schön gesagt zu Moshe from früher, because the details of this Karbonis have already been told to Moshe before. So it's Ishay, yeah, that which you were told before. But Afa became, but yet, so Libatam, for whatever reason, there's a reason, or the Torah Rangis of the Parsha of Karbonis, the Torah put the section of Karbonis doing unter Parsha, in our portion, the Soif Arbaim Shon at the end of the 40 days. With the Klal, was Rashi bring Tarot become a Pirushay, as the rule that Rashi has brought down in several places in his commentary, and Mugdam Mocha Torah, there's no earlier or later in the Torah. So while the Pasuk is in Parshas Pinchas place, but this could have been in before, even in Parshas Emer, before the Parshas of the Yom Tovim in Parshas Emer came the Parshas Karbonis. According to this second possibility, as by the Parsha is the Emer of the Parshas Seinu, that both portions of Emer and our Parsha, saying we're told to Moshe one time. But given the Staber, it would have made sense as their onzog is onheib Parshas Hamayadis in Emer, so that the in the beginning of the Parshas Hamayadis in Emer, so there the pasuk starts over there. Daber of the Yisrael v'amarta alei Moedei Hashem, tells them about the Moedei Hashem after the Parsha of the Karbonos. Meant to oistel and divide the protim, that is meant to distinguish the further details that the Torah in the Parsha Moedis from alle dine hamoyedes hamoyed was der Eibishter hat schon früher gesagt Moshe. I already said Moshe, because we're saying that the Parshas Karbonos, Parshas Pinchas, and there was over there mention of the Yom Tovim. It's to distinguish the Protidinim Shem Parsha, which is our Parsha. Shem is saying, Martle Moed Hashem, as Dafke Di Zei, those that are in Parshas Emer, Dafke Malin, he needs to give over to all Yid. Und nicht die Dinim Vashteim in unser Parsha, and not the laws that are in our Parsha. Our Parsha in Pinchas has also some laws of Yom Tov. The Torah is telling you, Daber, Abnei Zumartaleh, Moed Hashem, only those. Because these are not important to all the Yid. Because the Karbonos itself, those were for those that are meant for the Kohanim, for those who back in Karbonos. Then it gets Alin on their meat, and we would say in this way that the Parsha Karbonos comes first, Parsha Pinchas comes before, and then the Torah is saying Dabrev, the Moedei should come after that. And the mitvot given them tamashinui, and this we can also explain the reason for the change in Lashon HaKosuf in the language of the verse which in Parshas Hamed is Parshas Emer. The Torah uses in the section of the Yom Tov in the Parshas Emer, on Parshas Karbonos, the Parshas Seinu, and the portion of Karbonos, our Parshas Pinchas. Dorten hebt sich on jeder Moed over there. Every Yom Tov begins with Anayin Dibur. By every Yom Tov it says, about doing Sukkot, doing Pesach, doing Shavuot, everything. Dagegen in unser Parsha, only as opposed to our Parsha, state nor beim only Parsha Tzivuk Lolu. Only beginning of the Parsha it says a general command, Savas b'nei Yisrael Marta Aleim, And the Torah doesn't say later on, before every Yontiv, Vaydaber Hashem. Why? Because the Agdom Tzavim Yisrael, the Nuzah Parsha, this Tzavim Yisrael is Agdom Klolus to Klolus. This is an introduction to both Parshas, to the Parshas Pinchas and the Parshas Emer. Parshas Meidus, Vakarbonis. Von unser Parsha Parshas Emer. Both. Torah starts off. The Noch is given the Zweiter Tzivui. Then there was a second command specifically about the Yom Tov. Dabrem Neisov Mart Aleim, that he should speak to the Bnei Yisrael and tell them that Ibrahim Alayid, those Allah have to give over all Yid. Die verstehen in Parshem Kenal, that says in Parshem. Und der Riber, Kedei das matig sein noch mehr, in order to emphasize, this is for all the Yidden. And this is more, the Eberste Mefarigim by Yedin Moed, Bazunder, Eberste says by every Moed, Dabrem Neisrael, this is for the Yidden, this is for the Yidden, this is for the Yidden. Parshas Emer, which is for the Parshas Pinchas, which was said before Parshas Emer, which is for all, only for the Kohanim, for those who need to do the Korbanos. And this is Daber Mitzvah, and that's why the Torah keeps on repeating. So, two possibilities the Rebbe brings down. Either the Parshas Pinchas was Taka said that where it's placed in 40 years in the desert, after 40 years in the desert, or Parshas Pinchas just placed there, but it really belongs before Parshas Emer, the Parshas Yom Tov, as an introduction to Parshas Korbanos. And because the Rebbe says Rashi should more learn that this is the place that it was said in Parshas Pinchas, so therefore, the Rebbe will bring down. So then we would learn that maybe this wasn't the place where he actually said. Let's look. Very, very interesting. Let's look inside Zion. This rule, there's no earlier or later, is not something which. So logically, basically, the Rebbe wants to say we should say that this is where the portion of the Meidus were, the Korbanos were set over here, not before. Not before, like the first option that the Rebbe brought down. This is what we should say. That's the logical Pshuta Shel Mikra, because we don't say normally, only if we have to, we have no choice. So then, bald as the klal in mugde mucha batoyder werd gesagt ab Pshuta Shel Mikra, darf kein Fall wenn man muss annehmen, as the parsha nit Leute say that as manim. Only when we have no choice and we must accept that these portions are not according to the order of time. Geretchen Filmol has spoken many times. Is verstandig, so it's understood. That's how Pshuta Shel Mikra. That the way the Pshuta Shel Mikra is in Parshas HaKarbonos, the Parshas Seinu Gizogivon, the portion of Karbonos now Pasha was said the Sefer B'Yom Shana, the end of 40 years. That's where it's written. That's what was said. We're not going to say that it was just placed there and it was said 40 years earlier. When we Rashi's Medaik from Pasuk. And look at Rashi's Loshen. It says, Amar Ta'alehem, as Korban Ilachmi, the opening of the Parshas Pinchas. Marta's Korban Pinchas. So Rashi says, Ma'omur L'mayla. What says before? What says before means said, meaning that's when it was said. Rashi asks over there, how come this follows after Moshe Rabbeinu's request? Yivked Hashem. So he doesn't say because this is actually the time that it was said. Because we have to accept simply as Parshas HaKabbalah is not nismacha. It's not like the Torah just placed it. It was said next to Parshas Emer, and the Torah put it into here. Und das heißt, es ist nur geschrieben geworden bis Pinchas. I heard that it's only written close here. Ob gesagt geworden früher, but it was said before, that's not the simple, nor sie ist gesagt geworden da. That's what Rashi says, Ma'amur l'mayla, what's said before. However, wenn sie wollte aber beim Seufen Parsha Kabbalah noch nicht gestanden bei jedem Menschen in Israel. If it would not say here that Moshe said this to the Bnei Yisrael, was demot yesh b'mashma, then it would be understood as the Parshas Nedarim hitzchilu dvorov un lo yomar lehem zu, that he started with Nedarim, he did not say them this, which means this Parsha doesn't even belong here. You begin the Parshas Nedarim, and this he didn't say over here, and then we would have to say that this was said before. Well, does Machrir gewend zu sagen, this would have forced us to say, as the Parsha steht beim Koima, that this Parsha is not in its place. Sie ist gesagt worden zu Moshe zusammen, this was said to Moshe together, together, and noch fahren even before Parsha Meidus and Parsha Emer. Portion of Meidus and the portion of Emer. But the Torah is masmich the Parsha dot to gewissen Tam. The Torah brought it here for a certain reason, because it doesn't say that he said it over. So he didn't even say this. Not now. He brought it in for the Parsha. The detail of our Parsha. So alle Yidden hat gesagt, nur die Dinim from Parsha Emer. Never said it to them. This was said before, and only to the Kohanim from Achanal Sivav. The Riber muss stehen der Posik, Vayemer Moshe Bnei Yisrael Goimer, beim Sefer under Parsha. That's why the Torah has to write Vayemer Moshe zu klar machen, to make it clear, as Moshe hat übergegeben euch die Parsha zu allen Yidden. Moshe gave over this portion to all Yidden. Und therefore is verstandig, therefore understood, as the Parsha is gesagt geworden, da, was said here, okay, Parsha Zaksuvim, as the simple meaning of the verse, the Parsha is coming on the Seder, that the portion comes on the Seder. So when Rashi says this big chiddush that Rebbe asked, he didn't tell them, Taka, didn't tell it to all the Bnei Yisrael. That means he didn't tell them. Eisches, noch Hashinu zwischen Parsha Meidus von Emer und Parsha Kabbalah is the Parsha Seder. Another change. So there's also a lotion Dorten steht besima Parsha by Daber Moshe. Do by Yomer Moshe. But Yishlemer the Bible is out derech halacha. Never explain the explanation of derech halacha. In Parshas Emer was sich wie Iker wegen Dinim was ein Nigeya in alles Manim B'Shaveh. The portion of Emer in which it talks mainly about laws that are in all times equally, which is the Isur Malacha B'Yom doing Malacha Yontiv, the mitzvahs Yontiv, and the mitzvah of Yontiv, which is always Werd Gizog B'Loshen Vaydaber. It's said in the language of Vaydaber. Was weist of a Zach, was is Nimshach V'Nifsach, it shows on something that it's a continuous and it doesn't interrupt. Ashein Kain, in unser Parsha, was Retzach the Ikev and Karbonis, but in our Parsha, as opposed to, when we talk about Karbonis, was that in Nitok, Pshutim, Bismanagol, literally, they don't exist during the time of exiles. It's done nor their kolaisik, but Toidos Oilo Kili Krakula. We only have one who occupies himself in the study of Allah as if he brought an Oilo. State Lashon Amira. That's why it says Lashon Amira. That's one explanation why over there by Korbanis it says Amira because it's not always. V'oid, another one. The laws of the Yom Tov, which are in all times equally, state by Daber was a Lashon Kasha. But there it says by Daber, which is a Lashon of harsh, by Daber. The Eibishter Mont B'Toikif, the Eibishter demands with a force by Eden, as Mizol Mekayim Zayin the mitzvahs, that we should observe the mitzvahs on Untershed. Doesn't make a difference. Is the Beis Hamikdash or Bisman Agolus supposed to do the mitzvahs? As opposed to this, that a Yid has to occupy B'Teres Oil Chulu. Bisman Hagolus, in the time of Golus, it's not by daber. It's not a force. It's not a command. It's not an obligation. It's not absolutely necessary. Montes need Loshen kosher. We don't demand it with a difficult language. But adrab, the contrary, Eden monen, Eden are demanding yiratzim ufanecha chulu, that be the will shetoshu chulu sivneu meira. The sivneu the Beis Hamikdash. Hashem should build the Beis Hamikdash. V'sham nasel ufanechos korbanos chaviseinu. Over there, we'll do the obligatory korbanos k'mitzvos v'tzenecha as instructed by your will, as written in our Torah, as it says in Parshas Pinchas. It's not just occupying in the Torah, but which is like you brought, but the actual. But that's an Amira. That's why in our Parsha it says Amira in a soft. The Eibishter betzich by Eden. The Eibishter is asking, begging by Eden, by the Eden. As they say their korbanos. They should occupy themselves in the order of korbanos. Koilo befrat von unser Parsha, including especially our Parsha. Zogen dit Sukim betfilas hayoyim, to say these verses during our prayer of the daytime. When we say in Musaf all the time the Sukim of the korbanos, generally occupying yourself in the laws, in the teaching of Olam, that way it's as if you makriv. This will bring about the bringing of the Olam literally. The King Mashiach builds the Mikdash. We go back and we offer the korbanos. All the mitzvahs written in the Torah. Very speed in our Dale canal. And there will make us korbanos chaviseinu. The korbanos obligation, the mitzvah of your wills, as Hashem wants us to do. That is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Pinchas, Tavshin Chav Hei.